welcome back to the Detours in Music podcast. My name is Eric Ruple, and today is our first returning guest. I interviewed Dr. Eric Ruple, who is also my dad, 2 years ago for season 1, and he was at a detour point in his career serving in a role in administration and has now taken another turn and is back to teaching piano. I think listening to this episode really proves the point of the podcast, that the journey is long and you never know what twists and turns might come up, and to always take them as opportunities. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, my name is Eric Ruple. I am a professor of piano at James Madison University, where I've been teaching for 34 years.
How did you get your start in music?
Well, I started in first grade because my first grade teacher thought I was a little hyper and needed a distraction. So she said, why don't you take piano lessons? But that's the reason why I started. But I had a pretty musically inclined parents, so they would have had me starting it anyway within a year or so. But that was kind of an early start, but that's when it all happened, first grade.
Would you recommend to people who have annoying children to put them in piano lessons?
I'm not going to say I was annoying, but it could work. I think I was kind of hyper and easily distracted, not just for that year, but probably for a few years after it. So I must have been a real joy to teach. But I was able to, do what she wanted, the teacher. And if parents are involved, and my mom sat with me and practiced with me just about every day through, as I remember, maybe even through 5th or 6th grade, which was not my idea of fun, but I am sure that I would not have been able to progress in the right line as I was able to if she hadn't been there to practice with me every day.
Did you do any musical things outside of piano growing up?
Not really. I was in the elementary school, I guess it was an orchestra of some kind, for a little while. And I wanted to play piano in that, but they stuck me on drum because they already had somebody to play piano. And but not really anything else but that. That was it.
And when did you realize that you wanted to do music past just a hobby?
Well, when we moved to Arizona from California, when I was in 7th grade, I got a new teacher, and that teacher was a really good teacher. So one of the first really, really strong teacher I had, who had an idea about what was needed to go on past there. So I quickly just got really interested in it, and I remember it was in that 8th grade, 9th grade time period where I just decided I was really wanting to keep doing it. I didn't have an idea I was going to do it in college yet, but that's when it became something more than just surviving from one week to the next on lessons, and I started practicing up to a couple hours a day in maybe 8th grade, something like that, and trying to accomplish what she wanted. And then when I got into high school, I started entering some competitions, and those were really fun. I think the first one that I really remember was a concerto competition, and that was in Texas. And so we all drove to Texas for this concerto competition from Tucson, Arizona. And just getting ready for that was kind of taking it to another level. So again, I don't remember if that was freshman or sophomore year in high school, but after that that was kind of my reason for doing all these things, was to get ready for these competitions. And then I started getting more into all the music and hearing a lot of music from the other students that I was very interested in. And that became, again, I wasn't thinking in terms of this is what I'm going to do for my career, but that's what I was really spending a lot of time doing, and had a lot of short-term goals with that.
So maybe by the time you graduated high school, you were thinking, this is what I've put a lot of energy in. Maybe this is what I should do for college.
Well, probably when I was a junior, I started thinking that way. And I was practicing even more, probably, 3+ hours a day. Sometimes it was more than that, but that was, in those days, we didn't have quite as many distractions as today. But anyway, so I'd practice quite a lot, and learned some pretty big music. And by the time I was a senior, I was thinking that's what I wanted to do. So it was, I would say, more or less a straight line from those lessons and just more and more high school work. And I entered more of the state competitions and did well in a couple things. And so I was getting good feedback from that. So it seemed like a logical step to do it in college.
So where was your step for college?
Well, I applied to, I believe I applied to two schools, and one was University of Arizona and one was Arizona State, but I went to University of Arizona, which allowed me to live at home, save money on that, I suppose, and I'd met both the teachers at the different schools, so that's where I went for 2 years. However, after 2 years, my first real detour, I decided that was a mistake, having gone to that school, University of Arizona, for me. I had a rocky relationship with a teacher, so I decided that I wanted to change, and I ended up going with that other teacher at Arizona State. So that's where I went after 2 years.
And then you stayed there for your master's?
I stayed there for 4 years, 2 years of master's, 2 years finishing the bachelor's degree, and then 2 years of master's. And it was all piano performance. So that part of it was a straight line, but the who the teacher was and all that was changed.
What was something, looking back, that you were struggling with in your undergraduate degree, besides teacher-student relationship, or you can talk about how that was important? Well,
that was difficult, the teacher-student, and I do think that for any student, that's the most important relationship you are going to have in college. So that's why I always encourage students to please go have a lesson with someone, get to know them a little bit, see if that's a relationship you think is going to work. Of course, you never know for sure, but it's the best you can do. And I didn't really have the advantage of doing that, even though I could have, but I just didn't know that then.
Or listen to their interview on the Detours.
Or listen to the interviews on Detours and Music, which I know many people have done.
Yes.
So anyway, I would say that made it for a rocky situation. The other thing, though, that I thought was important in retrospect is that I had never lived away from home through that second year of staying home. And for some reason, I thought that was something I should do, save money, live at home. But in retrospect, I think that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
I don't think about a lot of mistakes, but that was one. I should have, of course, who knows? It all worked out, but yeah. I really wish that I had gone away as a freshman and grown up in a lot of other ways that, just had to be delayed because I was staying at home and not really dealing with college completely. So I'm very grateful for that change, and that is really an important one to get away. And maybe not the same for everybody, but for me, I should have done that earlier.
What was the transition like for you between your bachelor's and master's degree?
Well, the transition was not too big of a deal because I'd only been at this Arizona State for 2 years. So it's very typical you stay with a teacher for the one that you're working with well for. I remember he said when I first came to him that I should stay with him for 3 to 5 years. So it just seemed very logical to stay there because I'd only been with him for 2 years. So that was an easy step. The strange thing, though, that happened was in my second year, before my second year, he suddenly left and got a job somewhere else at Cincinnati Conservatory.
Okay.
So that was between the first and second year of my master's program that he just left.
Okay.
And I decided to stay where I was at Arizona State. But that fourth year, or the second year of the master's, was a really interesting year because I didn't really have a teacher that, let's say I had a harpsichord teacher who was a very good harpsichord teacher, but he didn't really know the piano repertoire so much. So I remember in that second year was a huge year because I started the year feeling sorry for myself, thinking, oh, I got to play this big program and my teacher doesn't know this repertoire very well. But what it caused me to do was to reassess how I was getting feedback from people. So I remember going out and buying a what they called a Sony Walkman, or a cassette recorder, really high-end cassette recorder, and I started recording myself and, so to speak, giving myself lessons. And that changed everything once I started really listening to what I was doing. And essentially giving myself lessons because I didn't know where to get the best feedback from. Anyways, so I got through both my master's recital during that same year, and just sort of became independent in a certain way. I certainly needed lessons, but I was feeling more confident about assessing my own progress. And I think it was, along with leaving home, probably one of the biggest things that happened was between those 2 years. And then after that, then I went to Cincinnati and I followed that teacher to Cincinnati Conservatory and stayed there 2 years and did an artist diploma with him there.
And what was the artist diploma like compared to the more formal degrees?
It was not as structured. The coursework was not as structured at Cincinnati. However, the big thing, and one of the reasons I was glad I went there, was that the other people there were terrific. They have a phenomenal program overall, but especially with vocalists and string players. And I had not done very much chamber music very, very seriously until I went there, and I was put with a trio, and there was a cellist from Brazil and a violinist from France, and we were thrown together, and we had just got a lot done working on a couple trios there. So that was terrific, and I was able to just be around a lot of very serious musicians that I thought, at least from my experience, was a lot more of a learning experience there than I had had before. So once again, the school atmosphere was very important, that change. I kept going. So for pianists, you're not done until you're really done. And so I did a DMA at University of Michigan. And once again, I thought I was going to stay in Cincinnati and just maybe switch to a different teacher there. But I remember one day walking through campus thinking, why do I want to stay here? I really want to move on. So I just made the decision to go to Ann Arbor, and not knowing anybody, not really even knowing the teacher. But at the time, Leon Fleischer was on the faculty at Michigan, so that's what got me interested in the beginning. However, he was only there for a once every other week situation, as many people know who've worked with him. You don't really study privately with him at all. You just play for him on occasion. So I had a different teacher there. But once again, that ended up being a tremendously important decision for me. And I had a great time there at the University of Michigan, working with different teachers, a whole different crop of fellow DMA students and other students who were really strong players, and really made the contacts that were instrumental in getting a job later on too.
And when you entered your DMA, were you thinking, I'm going through this program so that I can become a college professor in the end?
Well, I think that was probably partly in my mind, but not primarily. I think one of the things that I was pretty good at was to not look too far ahead and worry about that. I tended to just kind of look at the medium term, like I want to get this degree. I did the degree mainly because I didn't feel like I was done learning. So I went and I took some great classes and had a great time doing that, without necessarily, again, thinking, okay, then I've got to get a job after it. Which I think when you enter a DMA program, it's pretty important to just be able to appreciate what you're doing at the moment instead of worrying about all the things you've got to do, because it's a brutal degree. So it's a good degree, but it's hard work. Anybody who's been through DMA knows that. There are a lot of times when you may doubt yourself or doubt why you're doing it, and so the less you think about that, the better. Just kind of go through the process.
This is a little switching topics, but has the pandemic changed kind of your advice to your students on how they should perceive their careers or their futures?
Well, the pandemic has caused a lot of people to think about things a little bit differently, about what career options are there. And I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah.
I like to think, though, that every time you run into a situation like what the pandemic has hit, it's important to be to look at things as not just a problem or an obstacle, but an opportunity. So I don't know what opportunities are going to emerge, but I think different kinds of jobs, or just the fact that I think a lot of people are going to probably retire or get out of music entirely because of this situation that we've been through, and it'll cause perhaps a lot of different job openings to occur for other people. So it's kind of like when there's a forest fire, there's a lot of new shoots that can grow then, and so maybe there are opportunities that might not have happened beforehand. So I don't really know. I do think that in recent years, and it's not because of the pandemic, but kind of at the same time, there's been a big emphasis on entrepreneurship, like doing podcasts or other things, and I think that the focus on not maybe being quite as linear as we used to be is a good one. I'm a big believer in skills that are transferable. So, for example, music majors are usually really good at being independent, working and solving problems, taking criticism. These are all things that, working in groups or by yourself. These are all things that musicians know about, and if you spend any time around, if a student spends any time around music schools, they hear these things all the time, because those are the skills that a lot of these businesses are looking for. So again, as this turns into an opportunity, I think that the whole landscape of jobs is changing. And I feel this way about how music's going to change, but I think a lot of people have no idea what the job market's going to look like, even in 5 years, not to mention in a career starting out now. So I think that, again, it doesn't even matter so much that you major in a certain area, because you don't know if that's going to be where you end up. But having these skills and really, really working on transferable skills that can adapt to almost any situation, I think that's more and more critical. And honestly, I think music majors have these kinds of skills. I think they work on them and refine them and have been tested through college. So I have more confidence now that music majors have the ability to find their spot in the world. I have maybe less confidence that it's going to be exactly what they thought it was going to be. Yeah. In other words, going right to teaching in college. I don't know if college positions are going to be as plentiful as they have been. I have no idea what colleges are going to do. Colleges don't know yet. But I do think that the skills that the students gain at whether it's undergraduate or graduate are going to be more and more important and make them more marketable in general. Okay.
What made you decide that you wanted to do another interview?
I decided to do this second interview because I did this with you 2 years ago, and at the time I was in the midst of a pretty major change in my own job at James Madison, and that was I was working as the interim director of the School of Music, and at that time I probably I don't even remember, but I probably tailored my answers towards that job and how that had led me there, which was a definite detour. And I think we probably spent a lot of time talking about that. and I didn't know if I was going to be staying in that or coming back to piano, or what exactly the future held. So as it turned out, I'm back in piano, which is all good, and so I'm working on getting ready for some performances and getting ready for the school year. So I thought that would be more appropriate for anybody who's listening to this. That it might it might sound a little strange if they're listening to something with me that talks about something I'm not doing.
Yeah.
So I'm back in the piano studio now. So I thought it was a good idea to revisit the interview.
It's also a good example of a detour that has changed twice, with primarily teaching piano, going into administration, and back to piano. And I know at James Madison you're really pushing for people to have things like an interview in their bio for incoming students to see and listen to. And so for any students who would want to study with you, this is more accurate for you today.
Yes, I think that I have known students who spoke to me when I was in that other position who said that before they came down to the audition, they listened to some of the interviews that you had given with other, on a different podcast with other teachers, and that told them a lot about the people that they might be studying with. And along with what I said earlier, that it's important to get to know the teachers, I think this is a much better way to get to know me, or some things about me than just looking at some bio.
Yeah.
So, and I have the feeling students are much happier to do this. Yeah. Much happier to listen to this.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think it's a lot better way.
When you're approaching incoming students, what is some advice you have for them as they look at this world of music?
Well, it depends in part as to how far along they are, what age they are. I think that, like I said, I think there are more opportunities now that are varied for music majors than there used to be. We have traditionally always had a Bachelor of Music, and we still just have a Bachelor of Music with different tracks you can take, like education or performance or music industry. But we're soon going to start something called a Bachelor of Arts, which will allow more students to participate in music who may not want to even commit to a music major, which is pretty intense. So that's one thing. I'd say that there are more opportunities. So depending on how much background students have, first thing, of course, is do the best you can trying to get with a teacher right where you are. Many people have good teachers, but we're running into more and more students who aren't studying with anybody, and we always encourage them to, as soon as they can, get with a teacher, and we can help with that. So if there's anybody who doesn't have a teacher and doesn't know where to go, just contact us, and we can help you, line you up with somebody in your area who would be a good teacher. That's just so important, because every month you're studying with somebody, you're going to get better. You're going to find out more, and college is pretty difficult, can be. And we really work hard to help students where they are, but it's if you come in with less of a background, then you have to work hard. You've got to work hard to kind of make that up as best as you can. So, and piano has the unique, I would say, characteristic more than almost any other instrument, that you have to have a lot of years behind you before you come to college. So it's not unusual for students to have studied for, well, let's say
14 years.
Yeah, it could be that many, but I'm thinking more like at least 6 or 8. That's not unusual at all. In fact, it used to be almost required. Nowadays, we get people who have had less than that, but you're going to get a lot more out of it the more you study. So even if somebody were to talk to me and they're 13 years old, they want to get started with it, I'd say, well, get a teacher right now. Get a good teacher who can help you progress. And the years you study doesn't matter as much as what you're able to get done those times. So everybody learns a little differently, and music study is not for everybody. But I think that's one thing that's very important, is to get with a teacher who can get you to where you want to go. And that doesn't, sometimes people study with their, friend down the street. That's not always a good idea.
Yeah.
So I think most places now have good music organizations that can really help you get with the right teacher that'll push you enough to get you as many of the skills as you can. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really big key, is the private lessons. And then, like I said, I think going and taking a lesson with somebody at the college, whether it's here at James Madison or any other school, just to go and in person, and that's better than Zoom, but go in person and play for them and have a lesson. I do that. We all do that regularly. Mm-hmm. And don't be afraid to ask for that. I think teachers are more than happy to give you that time. Mm-hmm. And they probably won't even charge you for the first time you come in. And, just to get that relationship started. I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's good advice, regardless of where you are located, to reach out to a university that has a school of music about finding a teacher in your area, because it is maybe harder for the teachers to market themselves, or young teachers to market themselves, than it is for you to find a teacher. Have you thought about what you would do if you could not do music? No music.
No music at all?
We can do
or
both.
Just playing piano?
No playing piano or no music, and no music at all.
Okay. Well, I've always liked history pretty well, and I did have a time during my doctoral program. It was almost a year where I really was unable to play, unable to use my right hand. So I had to think about a lot of things then. And one thought I had, I never really seriously thought about not being in music in some form, but I thought about alternatives to being in piano, and that included thinking about possibly music history or music theory. Mm-hmm. I like both those subjects, which has been good, because since then I've taught music history classes and music theory classes from time to time, and I enjoy classroom teaching, so that's fun. So those are alternatives for that. Now, if you're saying about not music, then I think about it.
I'm just
once
curious.
once I got my doctorate, there's no guarantee of getting a teaching job. So then I was starting to think, what am I going to do for money? And again, kind of short term. I remember it was July. I didn't have a job yet, and I'd gotten my doctorate a couple months earlier. And so I was thinking, I lived in Ann Arbor, which is the home of, some people might remember, Borders Bookshop. So I thought, I'll just go there and get a job for a while. But I was thinking temporarily for that. So not in music, I'm not sure. But I probably would have ended up teaching somehow. Okay. Hopefully at college level, maybe something like
film.
Well, yeah, or history or something like that. I like those things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Uh-huh.
Would you say that going into administration was the largest career detour or career focus change?
Definitely, yeah. There have been 2 times when I was asked to step in for in an interim position as director of the School of Music. And at JMU, we have a large School of Music, relatively speaking. We have over 400 students total, and about 40 to 50 faculty full-time. So it's a large operation. And so I did it about 10 years ago or so, and did that for 1 year, and that was pretty intense. It's a huge learning curve. But once again, I do think some of the skills transfer over. Not enough skills about how to use a spreadsheet, though. So I was a little bit stuck on some things, but it went well. And then I was very glad to get back to piano. And then when the second time happened, it was a little bit harder decision about whether to go back into piano or try to stay in administration, whatever it was. And so I had a better time. I think the second time around, that was for 1.5 years. And it's a huge transition. There's nothing quite like it. But I think I like helping people. If I could help somebody with some issue they've got, or solve a problem, or find a space, or come up with some money for something, or a creative idea, I really enjoyed that a lot. I definitely think this is being in the music making part of it is where I'm most comfortable. So I'm happy to be back doing that. But it was, there's a lot of benefits both ways. A lot of pleasure you can get out of both. But yeah, it's definitely the big transition. It's huge.
How would you define Detour for your life?
It is opportunities, and it's just about, I would say my detours have sometimes just been not necessarily in changing my mind to do something different, but just considering different options along the way. When you're in school, you really don't know what you're going to do or how that's going to work out. And so I'm surprised when I look back and say I never really strayed from the single path from high school student to today. I've always been doing pretty much the same thing. There were a couple major detours in the administration part of it, but in my mind I had different ideas along the way that I might do this and that, but those never happened. So I guess a detour was just keeping the possibilities open, but I never really despaired over that too much. And so things worked out, even though I wasn't sure at the time. Obviously, we don't know the future, but I think it's important to kind of be able to think short term, always, even if you don't know the long term, be able to just say, okay, here's what I want to do now. Here's my goal for now. This is what I'm going to get done, or this is what my goal for the semester. In the college life, we can think in terms of semesters and years, which I don't know how people who work all the time think about things.
Yeah.
It's just one long stretch, but we can think about it in terms of a certain year, or certain students we have, or certain performances we got ready for, things like that. And so those have been my goals, is to always think in shorter bites rather than long term. I kind of strayed from your question a little bit.
What brought you into the job at JMU?
Well, like I said, after I graduated, I had nothing, and I remember it was middle of July, or towards the end of July, and suddenly, within the course of a week, I had the opportunity to investigate 3 jobs, and I ended up getting 3 job offers, but they were in the reverse order that I wanted the job. So I was offered the first job, but I preferred the second job, and then so I gave up the first one, and then JMU was the third one, and that was the one that was the best one. What happened was, and this often happens in the summer, somebody left very suddenly without, it wasn't planned, but the year before. So they left in the middle of the summer. So the music department was stuck in a way. They had an opening, and they didn't have time to fill it, so they brought in people really quickly, and I was offered a 1-year position, and I took it because that had the possibility of lasting more than 1 year. So I took it for the 1 year, applied for it after that, and got it for like a 3-year period the second time, and then after that a couple people retired, turned it into a full-time position, and that's what I applied for the third time. So I've actually applied for this job 3 times, and so that's how it happened. It was just the chance that it could be more permanent. I had no idea that it would be, but of course it's turned into a very good job, and been here forever. But at first it was just the quickest one. And what happened was, as this job was open, the people on the faculty were asked to talk to their old teachers at their old schools, and see if they've got anybody who's ready for a job right now. And so it happened that the one of the piano faculty who played organ primarily happened to be a student of the same teacher that I had at University of Michigan. So he just wrote to him and said, "Do you have anybody there?" And so he said, "Well, yeah, here's this guy." And So one thing led to another, and that's how I ended up there.
Would you recommend to people to kind of jump at the opportunity for a job that seems better but isn't as long-term? Like, would you recommend doing a one-year position over another school or another offer?
Well, college jobs the college system is a little bit hard to break into. So I have a number of doctoral students, and I've always recommended that if they got an opportunity to get into some kind of a tenure track position, to take it, even if it wasn't what their dream job is. Because once you get in there, maybe it's not where you want to be, but if you can do well for the first few years, then you can apply for something else. There's always movement, but it's harder to break in if you don't, have that experience. People or colleges and universities are more inclined to look at people who've already had some experience in the job. So I think that's the best way to go, is to just get in somewhere, even if it's at a really small school, and just go from there. I think that's generally better. I don't know if that proves itself, but I have had some students who've gone on and done well with that, and started somewhere and then moved on to other schools, and it's been a good way to go for them.
What are your current goals, maybe individually as a pianist, or for your piano studio or JMU, or for music in general?
I'm hoping, my number one goal is that this year is kind of a normal year. I hope that classes are in person, because I like seeing people's faces. And we did teach lessons in person last year, and that was with a mask, which is okay. But I hope that we're more in person than we were before. That would be really great. So I hope that we can do that. I hope we can have concerts on campus that family and friends can go to. It's been very sad the last year and a half, and we've had to do most of this with a very limited amount of space or not at all. So with that hope, I hope to perform a few times this year. There's one, I don't have any solo, well, there's the List Society. I'm a member of the American List Society, and there's a festival every year. And this year we're having that festival. We're planning on it, and I'm supposed to play on that. It's in October, and I'm hoping that will happen. We have a piano concert scheduled for January with all the piano faculty together, which will be interesting, putting 4 pianos on stage, but that's going to be fun if we can. So we're hoping we can do that. So those are probably my goals. And for students, of course, I'm hoping that they can perform more, that we can have normal classes for them, normal ensembles, just like you want Cincinnati to have normal ensembles, and that we can get a clearer idea of the direction of schools. We hope that master's programs, graduate programs open up for undergrad students, and that doctoral students can get jobs. So I guess we're hoping for more of normalcy would be a really good idea. The other thing that I would say, in answer to your question, I think we have a great opportunity now to, especially in the piano repertoire, expand towards a lot of composers we've not ever really included in our repertoire. And I mean specifically newer music, music by underrepresented composers. I've been spending a lot of time this summer listening to a lot of music I've never heard before, and I'm asking myself why I haven't heard that music before, because it's some really good stuff. And so I'm looking forward to having students discover that with me. I want all my students to play some music by newer composers, at least a little bit, even if it doesn't sound quite tonal. I think that's okay too. And so I think I'm looking forward to that sort of experience with students. And I really think we're in a very important part in time period in music history where there's going to be a whole new series of kinds of music that's going to be played in concerts besides the old classics. And I'm looking forward to that.
So the quote is by Arnold Schoenberg. It says, "If it is art, then it is not for all, and if it is for all, it is not art."
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? It's sort of speaks to what I was talking about with repertoire, I think. Classical music tends to be on the elitist side of things. And I am one who really likes very complicated or in some ways esoteric music that's hard to comprehend, like late Beethoven, for example, or standard music. I think the more you know that, the more you spend time with it, the better it gets all the time. But I do think we are at a point where that could be changing in some ways. And so I think that we need to be open to different kinds of musical experiences, different backgrounds, different nationalities in the music. I've always promoted, if I had students from, for example, Asian students, I think it's great if they can play something by a composer from their country. And we don't usually have a lot of that in piano. We have so much, European music. I also think that American music is really important. I do think we have a natural affinity towards music of our own country, even if we don't understand it. Of course, I support dissonant music in different forms. I think it's just a matter of listening to it a lot. But again, it's that kind of music has not been for everybody. So I wouldn't say that I agree with that quote for the future, for now, but I understand it, of course. And so I hope that we can find ways to communicate maybe a little bit easier and better in the future. And I do think this moment in history demands that we communicate better. I read an interesting article in Time magazine about 2 months ago, and the article was about how the whole upheaval of the last few years has caused a lot of change in the arts. And a lot of it was about the Black Lives Matter movement, things like that. And so I read that, and about all the different arts that had all these ways that it was affecting the arts, how change was happening. But in music, didn't talk about classical music. It talked about lyrics only in, for example, hip-hop music. And I just thought it was interesting that when they talked about music, they actually didn't talk about music.
Yeah.
They talked about
language.
They talked about the stories.
Yeah.
And so I was left with the idea that we still are at a point where there may be a big change or open to new things, but nobody knows what that change is. It partly is the stories, the words, but music is about a lot more than just the words. It's about the structure and the sounds as they come together. And I think that's what Schoenberg's talking about. It's about how sounds come together and whether they're immediately accessible. I don't know what the future is for music, but I think performers, we're part of the answer to that, because we choose what's going to be heard by choosing our music on programs. And we can help make a classic. And I think, we don't know what will happen in 50 years from now, what will be remembered, but we're the ones making those choices now. So I'm excited about that, about helping to find what our new values are for music. How does music change in 2020? Yeah, and I don't know the answer, but we need to start asking those questions and finding music that we have neglected, or we need to take a second look at. And so that's an interesting quote to me, because I think I directly don't think it speaks to today. Yeah. But it spoke to a time, but not for today.
And I think maybe one solution to what you're saying could be like speaking to your audience about the piece, of course, before you play,
Yes, communicating the meaning of what's going on, definitely. And in fact, I think that that program notes are dead, as are possibly comments from the stage.
Okay.
In some ways, I think that we're in a visual era, and I believe in. I'm going to try to promote students finding visual ways, maybe on a screen before the performance, to demonstrate, with words. Talk about this music. Talk about the composer. Talk about the relevant information that will help the audience understand this new music. But I definitely think that aspect of communication is going to be a part of the concert. I'm not sure there are going to be that many old traditional concerts anymore, but I do think they should involve some new ways of looking at music. I was really struck by this when I was looking at the Cincinnati Symphony schedule for this year. All concerts had music by either a living or underrepresented composer, and I think it's inevitable that that's going to happen all the way down to the undergraduate level. And I think it needs to. I think it should.
Because if they're changing the model from the top, if that's the model, then hopefully eventually.
Yeah, and students need to know how to work with composers and learn about music. And we, during this process, we'll ask ourselves, is this good music, or is this maybe not such good music? Is it worth performing, putting hours in, or is it not? And I think there's a lot to discover. So I'm excited about it. But it is interesting to see that quote, because it's a whole different era where that comes from. But yeah, I think we're on the verge of some new ways of working with music and concerts. I've enjoyed this process. I'm glad to see that the podcast is doing so well from its early days.
Yes.
It seems to be hitting, nationally and internationally to some point. And I hope that more people continue to listen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed hearing that update from Dr. Ruple. It is certainly special to me to have my dad's advice kind of locked down on a podcast form that I can play back for the future. And big thanks to him for a lot of the stuff that I've been able to accomplish. And he also helped come up with the name for the podcast. So it's really all thanks to him. If you'd like to keep up with the podcast, there are multiple ways you can do so. First of all, you can go to our website, which is detoursinmusicpodcast.weebly.com. You could also subscribe to our YouTube channel, also called Detours in Music Podcast. We also have a Facebook page and Instagram account where you can like and follow us. The Detours in Music Podcast is available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, but on Apple Music podcast apps, you can subscribe and rate us. If you ever want to get in touch with me and give more direct feedback, you can email me at detoursinmusicpodcast@gmail.com. As always, thank you for listening, and I hope you catch the next one.